For millennia, the greatest empires in the world made the exact same fatal mistake. They marched onto the Iranian plateau with swords drawn, convinced that this land could be conquered, broken, and erased forever. Alexander the Great came here with the armies of Macedonia. Roman power pushed toward these lands with discipline, steel, and imperial ambition. Arab armies swept across them under the banner of a new faith. Then the Mongol storm descended from the east with destruction so vast that entire cities seemed to vanish into dust. Any other civilization might have disappeared after suffering so many catastrophes. It might have dissolved into the cultural and political melting pot of history. But with Iran, something different happened. Time after time, even when it lost battles, capitals, dynasties, and whole political orders, it did not lose itself. That is the real mystery of Iran. Not that it was never defeated, but that defeat repeatedly failed to destroy it. Again and again, the conquerors won the war and then slowly lost the deeper struggle. A few generations would pass, and the invaders who had arrived as outsiders would begin speaking Persian, using Persian bureaucratic traditions, building in Persian styles, and ruling through ideas shaped by the civilization they had once tried to crush. Iran's greatest weapon was not only military strength, it was continuity, memory, and the enduring power of a civilization so old and adaptive that it could survive conquest by transforming the conqueror. How did Iran preserve its identity across centuries of war, occupation, and upheaval? How did this civilization remain itself while empires rose and fell around it? And how did Persia, a name that once sounded legendary across the world, insist on being called Iran instead? This is the story of a nation that learned how to survive defeat, how to turn collapse into continuity, and how to outlive powers that once seemed invincible. To understand that resilience, we have to go back far beyond the age of the famous Persian kings. In many traditional histories, the cradle of civilization is associated almost entirely with Mesopotamia or Egypt, while Iran is treated as secondary. But that picture is incomplete. Human life on the Iranian plateau reaches back tens of thousands of years, and some of the earliest complex societies in the broader ancient Near East developed here as well. This land was never merely a corridor between larger civilizations. From the beginning, it was one of the places where civilization itself took shape. One of the earliest great powers in this region was Elam, centered in the southwest of modern Iran, with Susa as one of its principal cities. Elam was not some minor kingdom standing in the shadow of Mesopotamia. It was a serious political force in the ancient world, one capable at times of challenging, influencing, and negotiating with the great states to its west. Long before the rise of the Persian Empire, the Iranian world was already participating in diplomacy, warfare, religion, and state formation on a major scale. Later, during the second millennium BCE, Indo-Iranian peoples moved south onto the plateau from Central Asia and neighboring regions. Over time, these groups blended with older populations and gave rise to the peoples later known as the Medes and the Persians. They belonged to the wider Indo-European family, and from ancient roots associated with the word Aryan in the sense of noble, emerged terms that would eventually be connected to the name Iran. The very name of the country carries within it the memory of immense antiquity. But geography and ancestry alone do not explain why Iran endured where so many others vanished. One of the deepest foundations of Iranian civilization was ideological. Long before Christianity and Islam, the Iranian world was profoundly shaped by Zoroastrianism, one of the most influential religious traditions of antiquity. It did not present life as a random chain of accidents. It offered a moral universe, a vision of existence as a struggle between truth and falsehood, order and chaos, light and darkness. To live well was not merely to survive, it was to take part in a cosmic battle. That worldview gave Iranian civilization unusual inner coherence. It taught that human beings were not passive witnesses in history, but active participants in a vast moral drama. Zoroastrian thought also helped shape one of the most powerful religious concepts in world history, the idea that time moves toward an ending, that history has direction, and that the world is headed toward judgment and renewal. In that sense, Iran did not merely defend a civilization, it helped shape the spiritual imagination of a large part of the world. In the first millennium BCE, Iranian power took a monumental political form. The Medes rose first, but it was the Persians under Cyrus the Great who built one of the most extraordinary empires the world had ever seen. Cyrus united key Iranian peoples and laid the foundations of the Achaemenid Empire. Under Cyrus, Darius I, and their successors, Persian rule stretched from Egypt and Anatolia to Central Asia and the Indus Valley. This was one of the first true superpowers in world history. What made the Achaemenid Empire so remarkable was not only its size, but its sophistication. Roads, taxation, provincial government, imperial administration, royal couriers, and systems of communication allowed Persia to govern immense and diverse populations across staggering distances. The empire was held together not just by armies, but by organization, policy, and an understanding of power that was administrative as much as military. And yet even this giant was not invulnerable. Greek memory would later immortalize Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis, turning them into the story of heroic resistance against Persia. But history was more complex than legend. The Persian Empire remained enormously powerful long after those conflicts. Still, the greater catastrophe came later, when the empire's vastness and political weakness opened a path for one young conqueror from Macedonia. Alexander invaded, shattered Achaemenid power, and burned Persepolis, one of the great symbols of Persian imperial glory. To many, it must have seemed that Iranian civilization had reached its end. But that was only the end of one dynasty, not of Iran itself. Even under Hellenistic rule, Iranian traditions endured. Greek rulers could occupy the throne, but they could not erase the civilization beneath it. In time, Iranian powers returned. The Parthians rose and pushed the Seleucid Greeks back. Their cavalry and flexibility made them one of the few powers capable of challenging Rome over the long term. After them came the Sasanians, who rebuilt a more centralized Iranian empire and turned pre-Islamic Iran into one of the great superpowers of late antiquity. For centuries, Iran stood locked in rivalry with Rome and then Byzantium. These were long struggles over Mesopotamia, Armenia, the Caucasus, prestige, and trade. Yet endless war has a cost. By the 7th century, the Sasanian Empire had been drained by internal turmoil and exhausting conflict. Then came the Arab conquest. The rise of Islam transformed the Middle East, and Iran stood directly in the path of that transformation. The Sasanian Empire fell. The old political order collapsed. Zoroastrianism receded. Arabic became the language of religion and scholarship across much of the new Islamic world. By all historical logic, Iran might have dissolved into a larger Arab-Islamic sphere and disappeared as a distinct civilizational force. But once again, it adapted instead of vanishing. Iran became Islamic, yet it did not become culturally blank. Persian identity survived and returned in a new form. The Persian language re-emerged as one of the great literary and administrative languages of Eurasia. Persian scholars, poets, administrators, and court culture shaped the Islamic world from within. The Caliphate conquered Iran militarily, but Persian civilization quietly helped reshape the civilization of the Caliphate. Then came the Mongols, perhaps the most terrifying invaders Iran had ever faced. Cities were razed, populations slaughtered, irrigation systems shattered, and whole regions devastated. For many societies, such a blow would have marked an irreversible collapse. Yet even here, Iran endured. Mongol rulers in Iran eventually embraced Islam, governed through Persian administrative traditions, and patronized Persian art, literature, and architecture. Once more, the invader entered as a destroyer and stayed long enough to be changed by the land. A similar pattern repeated under later Turkic and Mongol origin dynasties. Political power might belong to outsiders, but the deeper cultural grammar of the realm remained Iranian. New rulers arrived with their own military traditions, but the longer they remained, the more they were drawn into Persian models of court life, kingship, administration, and cultural prestige. In the early 16th century, Shah Ismail I founded the Safavid state and gave Iran a new and lasting political identity by making Twelver Shi'ism the state religion. This was one of the decisive turning points in Iranian history. It distinguished Iran sharply from the surrounding Sunni powers and helped forge a uniquely durable political and religious identity. Modern Iran was not born in a single moment, but the Safavid era gave it one of its most enduring foundations. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, Iran faced a different kind of danger. The great powers pressing on it were now Russia and Britain. Territory was lost, foreign influence deepened. Oil, trade, and strategy turned the country into a battleground for imperial competition. Yet even under this pressure, the question of identity did not disappear. If anything, it became more urgent. That is why the shift from Persia to Iran in the 20th century mattered so much. For centuries, much of the outside world had called the country Persia, a name filtered through Greek usage and associated above all with one region, Pars. But in 1935, Reza Shah asked foreign governments to use the name Iran in official correspondence. This was not the invention of a new name, it was the international assertion of an ancient one. It was a declaration that the country would define itself in the modern world not as an exotic memory, but as a nation conscious of its own civilizational depth. Then came the upheavals of the 20th century: modernization, foreign pressure, political turbulence, and finally the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The monarchy fell. Iran became an Islamic republic. Its relationship with the West hardened into suspicion, hostility, and geopolitical confrontation. And yet even this modern chapter fits the deeper pattern of Iranian history. Once again, Iran was not merely a passive object of outside power. It was reasserting the right to define itself. That is why Iran remains so difficult for outsiders to understand. In the modern imagination, Persia and Iran often seem like two separate worlds. Persia sounds poetic, distant, elegant, almost mythical. Iran sounds modern, political, tense, sanctioned, and immediate. But they are not two countries, they are two faces of the same civilizational continuum. For more than 5,000 years, this civilization has endured invasion, collapse, humiliation, reinvention, and return. Its greatest victories were not always military. Often they came later, after the battlefield was lost, when the conqueror found himself speaking the language, wearing the forms, and administering the world of the people he had defeated. That is the secret of Iran's survival. It did not always win wars, it did something stranger, it outlived them. And perhaps that is still the core of the Iranian story today. Beneath headlines, sanctions, slogans, and fear, there remains a civilization engaged in an old struggle over memory and identity. A struggle over how it sees itself, how others name it, and how the world chooses to remember it. Because sometimes the deepest battle is not over territory, but over meaning. Not over who rules for a moment, but over who remains in history when the empires are gone. And that is what makes Iran more than a country in the usual sense. It is a civilizational memory stretching across dynasties, religions, languages, invasions, and rebirths. Its borders changed, its rulers changed, its faith changed, but the core endured. Again and again, Iran proved that survival is not always about avoiding disaster. Sometimes it is about carrying your identity through disaster so completely that even the victors cannot erase it. That is why the story of Iran feels less like the biography of a state and more like the long, unfinished life of a civilization.